Hello and welcome back. I hope that you are having a cozy day wherever you are. Today I'm breaking out the gouache alongside watercolour for a still life study, and I'm starting out with the brushes that you're seeing on screen, which is a pointed round and a 1-inch flat. And I'm starting off with watercolour. I'm using mainly burnt sienna for a value study to start off, and I do end up using a little bit of burnt umber towards the end for the darkest darks as well, but the vast majority of this bit is just burnt sienna. And I start off with very watery mixes, very light mixes, and then I gradually build up value over time, getting darker and darker and darker. And then, funnily enough, I do the exact opposite when it comes to the gouache, and I start with the darkest darks and then get lighter and lighter and lighter. And there's a few different ways of using gouache. In general, with watercolor, you want to build up from your lightest to darkest colors because you can't as easily remove what you put down, but with gouache you can put lighter colors on top of darker colors. So you have the ability to work a little bit more dark to light with gouache. So in this instance, I kind of did a going one way and then going the opposite way process, but I don't necessarily always do that when I'm using gouache. And the reference I'm using today is from a free set of reference images by Lane Brown, and I really recommend these. They have a set of winter still life references and a set of autumn still life references, and I've been using both of them in a few different mediums, in just graphite and my sketchbook, in watercolor, in gouache like this, and even some digital as well. And they're just really interesting takes on still life and drawing from, not really drawing from life because they're references, but there's some interesting subjects in there, and it's nice having a theme to go with them. So since it is winter, I thought I'd crack open the winter pack and pick something, and I ended up going with a bell and a pine cone. And the thing that drew me to this was that it was a very simple in initial appearance but complex in the execution. And that's because a pine cone and a bell have very different materials that they're made out of. Wood and metal, especially the metal that you get on a bell, are very different when it comes to how they reflect light. So I wanted to try and really capture how the metal has stark lights and stark darks on it, whereas the wood of the pine cone, or at least the plant matter of the pine cone, is a little bit more, how would you say, has a little less contrast in it overall. And I'm especially happy with the value study and how that went. And you'll see as we go along how the gouache ends up going. But I don't use gouache as much as I would like to, and every time I use gouache, I have a really good time. I know that I have a long way to go with improving at it, but that's also encouraging every time I pick it up as well. So I wanted to just do a still life. I knew I wanted to do something relatively relaxed, just take however long I wanted to do it. And I thought that I'd just work with gouache for this. And I definitely want to use gouache more, both because I really enjoy it and I also want to get better at it. Just for reference for how long this took me, the time lapse is at 10 times speed, and I also cut out all of the footage of things like drying times or if I took a particularly long time off camera doing paint mixing or looking at the reference or anything like that. So a lot of that time has been cut out entirely as well, but the time lapse is at 10 times speed. I don't necessarily time myself while I'm painting or drawing unless the time component is an important element in what I'm doing. So, for example, if I'm trying to do 20-minute studies, or I only have an hour, or I'm doing gesture studies, things like that, then I'll have a timer going. But in general, I don't necessarily have a timer going while I'm painting. But I hope that this gives a slight indication of how long this took. I did it over the course of a couple days. So the first day I did the burnt sienna and burnt umber like underpainting of the value study. And I also started on the gouache that day too. So I put in the darkest darks with first up straight black. At the moment in the footage, you're seeing me add in the next few layers of the dark greens and then onto some of the yellows. Now, the yellows might seem like an odd thing to suddenly bring in, but that's because I find that with yellow in gouache, in order to get a very, very pure yellow, you want to be able to put it down as it is as early as you can before you start adding things down around it. If you try and put pure yellow down without adding any white to make it opaque on top of darker pigments, it doesn't always come across as opaque. Of course, it depends on the yellow you're using, but I don't tend to use cadmiums. And in my experience, the gouache I've used that aren't cadmium yellows, the yellow gouache, just isn't opaque enough to be put down on top of, say, the dark greens that are on the bell near where the yellows are. So I like to put down the yellows a little bit earlier on than the sort of final lighter colors. I do find that gouache is one of those mediums that has an oh no middle stage to it. And this was definitely the point of the oh no middle stage, where you just have to keep going, trust the process, and see where it ends up taking you. But this moment was particularly oh no middle stage because I was laying down the initial like under colors that I then had to add more layers on top to, and it also looks a very odd outside of the context of having everything else done around it as well. I don't know why I decided to go place by place when I was doing this. So I started by doing the bell. Even when I was doing the value study, I focused on the bell and then I focused on the pine cone. In this instance as well with the gouache, I did the bell and then I did the pine cone and then I did the background and the main shadows. So I'm not sure exactly why I did that. I don't always do that, but that's what I did this time around. And I like the direction I went in with the, well, not the direction I went in with the bell. I like how the bell ended up turning out because I was thinking going into this that painting the light and dark of the metal material was going to be harder for me than painting the pine cone, but it actually ended up being the opposite way around. And looking at it now that I've finished it, because I'm in the future and I can see what it looks like finished, that I need to practice things that are dark value and aren't very reflective a bit more, because the pine cone had some it definitely had light on it, and it had some very interesting textures going on it as well because of like the lines. If you look at a pine cone on each of like the little petals, if you want to call them that. I don't actually know the term for them. If you know the term for them, leave them in the comments, like the little petals on a pine cone. Each of those petals, we'll just go with petals, have little lines on them, and some of the lines were dark, some of them were more mid-tone, and then some of them were very, very light with almost like a muted, as in not very saturated, a muted ochre, like a yellow ochre that was toned down on the yellow a little bit. And then there were some that were reflecting the blue of the background, so they were like a really light, muted, desaturated blue, but really, really light. And in trying to capture those textures, I feel like I threw off the value structure of the pinecone as a whole. So I quite like how I simplified the value structure in the value study that you can see now, which is why I'm bringing this up now, so you can see where I was initially going with the value structure and how it ended up going once it started the gouache on top. And I like some of the things that I did with it, though. I like some of the simplification that I did, some of the stylization that I did with it. But I think that in trying to capture some of the details, I got lost in those, and I need to focus on how to translate them without losing the value structure. So that's something that I can look back on and take into consideration when I'm doing other studies. And thankfully, with the winter pack, there are quite a few pinecone references. So if I end up picking up another one, then I can try and maybe tackle a pinecone again and have that in the forefront of my mind and try and see how I can improve that particular aspect next time. I do apologize if my throat and voice is a little bit croaky. At any point in this video, I am on my third cold of 3 months right now. We're going back to back and it's been fun, but we're video recording and voice recording anyway because help. And yeah, so I apologize. But moving on, with the gouache, I'm using mainly Winsor and Newton designer's gouache. I had a set of one of those introductory sets of gouache that I ended up expanding a little bit so that I have a yellow, a warm red, a cool red, a warm blue, a cool blue, a green, a purple, and then white and black. I don't have any earth tones in Winsor and Newton, and the earth tones that I use for gouache are actually Shinhan gouache watercolor hybrids. So it's not the Shinhan gouache, it's the hybrid line. And they're okay, but they're not gouache. So I want to try and pick up some earth tones in a range of gouache. I might try out Holbein because I've been hearing really, really good things about Holbein gouache. And I have my eye on a couple of the colours. I'm probably just going to go for a yellow ochre type colour. And then I have my eye on, I think it's the russet brown from the Irodori line. And I'd probably just leave it at those two for now if I try out Holbein. But for now, I'm making do with the Shinhan hybrids for my earth tones. But the initial watercolor value study I did, that was with Daniel Smith. You can, of course, just go straight in with really, really watered down gouache to do your underpaintings if you're wanting to do a value study to start off. But since I don't have earth tones in gouache, I thought I may as well use watercolor because you can just as easily use watercolor to start off these as well. You can use watercolor to do the vast majority of a painting and then finish it off with a little bit of gouache. They're both very compatible with each other to use in different ways. and it just felt like the right thing to do at the time for me with this, so I just went with it. What else have I been up to recently? I have been designing some D&D characters from my most recent campaign. I have a character called Ilena, and she ended up, along with the party, collecting a trove, amassing a collection of fairy mushroom creatures, and the main few of them I've been making into characters and designing what they'll look like. And so far, I have designed Poison Toad, Buttered Kermit, and I have a design for a third one, but I'm not sure who I'm going to make them yet. But for now, I at least have Kermit and Toad done, and I've done a digital mock-up of Buttered Kermit, and I played around a little bit with how I want to do digital coloring for lining color illustrations using that as well, which was interesting because I tried out using a mechanical pencil digital brush as a hatching method, like I was using color pencil to hatch. And I think that's something that I'm going to explore a little bit more when I do some future, more complex digital illustrations. I'm still playing around quite a bit with digital and how I want to use it. And I thought that trying to blend in some of the things that I do traditionally would be something fun to explore, and it was. And I'm also working on designing what Elena's going to look like. I know what she looks like in theory, and I also made her in the character generator of Baldur's Gate, but I want to at least start being able to draw her in my sketchbooks and maybe some illustrations and stuff. So I need to have a at least a semi consistent form of her drawing wise that I'm sure will develop over time as I draw her more and draw characters more and improve at characters and stuff as well. But that's coming along as well, so you'll probably see some of that on this channel eventually. If you're interested in seeing the digital stuff I've done for a Buttered Kermit, it's probably it's not even probably, it is over on my other social media. I have posted it on TikTok and Instagram so far, and I'll probably drop the time lapse of that on the very least to TikTok, I imagine. But for now, I'm probably not going to make a video on it for a little bit. I'll probably do a video once I am working on an ink and watercolor illustration of them, and then I can show you the sketching process, my sketchbook pages of them, and what went into coming up with how they look. So that might be a fun video to do in a little bit. And then I'll probably do the same thing with Elena as well. We'll see. It has been so much fun though, coming up with the fey fungoid creatures, the fairy mushroom creatures. And as soon as I came up with the designs of Buttered Kermit and Poison Toad, which are the actual names we gave them in the campaign, I never anticipated actually making any form of like art of them when I gave them those names. Some of the other names are insane to even mention. I've named several of them after Dragon Ball Z characters, which I'm probably not going to end up actually making into characters, but the more you know. I ended up amassing, I I think I must have at least 20 of them now, or Elena does. And eventually you run out of names. And when you don't anticipate them existing outside of the campaign you're in, you aren't necessarily particularly imaginative when giving them the names. So now that I'm actually designing them and making illustrations and sketches of them, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to rename a few of them. But I'm at least keeping Poison Toad and Buttered Kermit the same. I can't. Toad was the first one we found. And I know it's very on the nose having a mushroom called Toad, but he's at least called Poison Toad. And Buttered Kermit, I can't leave Buttered Kermit out. I can't change his name because of how we found him. And that would be a tragedy if I were to change his name. So I can't do that. But for the other ones, I might have to change their names. Oh, and that reminds me too, I am still planning on drawing my current Baldur's Gate character. I'm currently in Act 2, and I'm a good chunk through Act 2. At the very least, I'm a good chunk through the map. And I'm currently doing the Gauntlet of Shah. If anyone has been playing Baldur's Gate, ouch, pain. But I've been loving the game so much. It's been a long time since I've really just it's been a long time since a game has felt this good to me. And Baldur's Gate has been scratching all the itches, all the gamer itches, and I've been having a really good time. I never played any of the original Baldur's Gate games, and this was kind of like I have no idea whether I'll like this or not. I know I like D&D. I like roleplay games, but I don't know if I like this game. I like this game, and I've been having a lot of fun with it, and it's making me so inspired. I just want to draw and illustrate so many different things that have happened, and I'm having to remind myself to take things one at a time because I end up getting so many ideas. I don't have enough time to do everything. uh, you can see me wrapping up the background now. And there was a very interesting light and shadow thing going on with the background. There were these two pools of light towards the left of each of the objects. And then, of course, the two shadows as well. So the shadow of the pinecone was almost entirely surrounded by these pools of light, which was really interesting. I was a little bit indecisive about how much texture versus smoothness I wanted in the background, so I kept going in with more layers and then having to readjust the light pools, but in the end, this is what we ended up with. So a very textured, rusted metal, but still very shiny bell, and the pine cone. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you had a good time, and I'll see you next time. Bye!